We're told we live in the information age. But what if it's not information we're consuming? What if it's indoctrination? This isn't about left versus right. It's about conditioning versus clarity. And the uncomfortable truth is, some people are easier to deceive, not because they're less intelligent, but because they've been trained to outsource their thinking. Media saturation and the illusion of balance. Let's start with media. Left-leaning outlets dominate the landscape by a ratio of roughly 10 to 1. That's not balance. That's saturation. CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, NPR, WAPO, ABC, CBS, NBC. They don't just report, they curate reality. They repeat the same emotional framing across every platform, every hour, every headline. Meanwhile, right-leaning voices are pushed to podcasts, independent streams, and the occasional network that gets labeled dangerous for simply existing. So ask yourself, if one side controls the headlines, the algorithms, and the emotional tone, who's really being conditioned? Because when the same message is repeated for weeks, months, years, it becomes subliminal suggestion, not persuasion programming. Emotional branding versus logical inquiry. We've reached a point where public discourse isn't about policy, it's about performance. Figures on the left don't critique, they caricature. They compare opponents to horror villains, dictators, or comic book monsters. And their followers nod, not because it's true, but because it feels good. That's the real issue. Too many people are led by emotion and hate, not logic or evidence. Their reactions aren't based on what someone does, but on who they've been told that person is. That's why even when something objectively good happens, like helping a rape victim or a sick child, some refuse to acknowledge it if it's tied to the wrong figure. I've seen it firsthand, a story of real suffering and resilience shared publicly. Only 2 Democrats applauded, the rest sat silent. That's not principled opposition, that's ideological blindness, funding loyalty over citizenship. Let's talk about shutdowns. The push to keep them going isn't about protecting Americans. It's about preserving funding streams that disproportionately benefit illegal immigrants. Why? Because illegals aren't just seen as people in need, they're seen as future voters. And while many will deny it, the evidence is there. On government websites and budget allocations and policy priorities, billions redirected to housing, legal aid, and social services that many citizens can't access. That's not compassion, that's strategy. And when you point this out, you're called extreme. Not because you're wrong, but because you're interrupting the script. Project 2025, the manufactured boogeyman. Now let's address the latest panic button, Project 2025. Some claim it's Trump's blueprint for authoritarian takeover, but here's the inconvenient fact. Trump has publicly stated he has nothing to do with Project 2025, calling parts of it ridiculous and abysmal. Even the Heritage Foundation, which authored it, clarified that it doesn't speak for any candidate or campaign. So if you're tying Trump to it, you're not citing evidence, you're quoting a rumor. And that's how deception works. Emotion overrides verification. Censorship and indoctrination. Let's talk about censorship. We've seen documented cases of government pressure on tech platforms, threats to companies, coordinated suppression of dissent, all under the banner of safety. That's not democracy, that's control. And the irony? The same people screaming fascism are often the ones cheering when their side silences opposition. They don't want debate, they want dominance, the psychology of deception. People are easier to deceive when they've been conditioned to trust repetition over reason. They've been trained like racehorses with blinders, only able to see what's directly in front of them, and only if it's painted in the approved color. Tell them the sky is red, they'll nod. Tell them the right says it's blue, they'll fight to prove it's red. Even if the right found the cure to cancer, they'd find a way to discredit it. Even if Trump didn't start any new wars, they'd say it doesn't count. This isn't debate, it's narrative addiction. And the cure isn't more shouting, it's more scrutiny. When reflex replaces reason. Let me show you what narrative addiction looks like in real time. Mention no new wars, and instead of acknowledging restraint, they'll say it doesn't count. Mention economic gains, and they'll say it's invisible. Mention any policy success, and they'll pivot to tweets, tone, or caricatures. Here's the pattern. Funding Israel equals genocide. Sending National Guard equals fascism. Border enforcement equals bigotry. Tariffs equals joke. World leaders equals horrified. Tweets equals bullying. Legacy equals doomed. It's not analysis, it's a script, and it's repeated so often people stop questioning whether it's true, they just perform it. This isn't debate, it's emotional theater, and the actors don't even realize they're on stage. They say history will be the judge, but they've already written the verdict before the trial even began. That's why no matter what Trump does, good, bad, or neutral, they'll find a way to spin it into catastrophe. Because they're not reacting to reality, they're reacting to a character they've been taught to hate. And when you challenge that narrative, they don't refute, they deflect, they label, they caricature. Because when reflex replaces reason, truth becomes irrelevant. The lazy lens and the truth test. Let's be honest, the media landscape is dominated by left-leaning narratives, 10 to 1. They control the headlines, the tone, the emotional framing. So when Trump disavows something like Project 2025, you won't hear it. Not because it didn't happen, but because it doesn't fit the script. That's why most people don't know. They're not informed, they're conditioned. And the system knows it. It knows people are too lazy to do the research. And when they finally do, they don't investigate. They try to prove what they already believe. That's not research. That's confirmation bias. But here's the difference. I don't try to prove something is correct. I try to prove it wrong. Because if it survives that test, then it's probably true. That's how I went from extreme left to moderate. Not because someone convinced me, but because I stopped outsourcing my thinking. I stopped chasing emotional highs. I started confronting uncomfortable facts, and half the time, the truth was the opposite of what I'd been told. Not a conclusion, a confrontation. No, this isn't a conclusion, because conditioned minds don't stop at logic, they recoil from it. They'll rebut even the facts, they'll twist even the silence. That's why this isn't a wrap-up. It's a mirror. If you've been nodding along without checking the roots, pause. If you've been repeating headlines without reading the source, pause. If you've been defending a side without questioning its tactics, pause. Because the real question isn't who's right, it's who's still capable of seeing beyond the blinders. And if you're still arguing that the sky is red just because the media said so, then maybe it's not the sky that's broken, maybe it's the lens. The lens.